Date took me to a nude beach and now I'm jealous of his endowment. So I, M26, moved to Australia for work about a year ago. Settling into a new country was both exciting and daunting, but I was determined to make the most of this opportunity. As I adjusted to my new job and surroundings, I couldn't help but notice a particularly cute guy at the office. We'd exchange glances and smiles, and I found myself increasingly drawn to him. One day, to my surprise and delight, he approached me and asked if I'd like to go on a date with him. My heart raced as I said yes, trying to contain my excitement. Our first date was at a charming little cafe near the office. We talked for hours, discovering shared interests and laughing at each other's jokes. The conversation flowed effortlessly, and I found myself getting lost in his eyes, his smile, and the way he made me feel. We agreed to see each other again, and about a week later, we had our second date. This time, we decided to catch a movie together. As we sat in the darkened theater, our hands brushed against each other, sending a jolt of electricity through my body. I couldn't focus on the movie, hyper-aware of his presence beside me. As the credits rolled, we turned to face each other, and before I knew it, our lips met in a tender kiss. It was a moment I had been dreaming of, and it felt even better than I had imagined. We left the theater hand in hand, giddy with the excitement of our growing connection. The kiss had been perfect, but we both agreed to take things slow and not rush into anything more intimate just yet. I appreciated his respectfulness and the way he made me feel valued and cared for. Over the next few weeks, we continued to see each other regularly, going on dates and spending time together whenever we could. Each moment with him was filled with laughter, meaningful conversations, and a deepening sense of attraction. I found myself falling for him more and more with every passing day. It was after our third date that he asked if I'd like to join him at his favorite beach the following Sunday. The idea of spending a day with him in the sun and sand sounded perfect, and I eagerly agreed. However, he then mentioned that it was a clothing-optional beach, which took me by surprise. My heart skipped a beat at the thought of spending an entire day with him, soaking up the sun and enjoying each other's company. Without hesitation, I agreed, already picturing the two of us lounging on the sand, sharing laughter and maybe even a few more kisses. I felt my cheeks flush as I processed his words. A clothing-optional beach? I had never been to one before, and the idea both thrilled and terrified me. Growing up in the United States, nudity in public was heavily stigmatized, and I had never really considered it as an option. But living in Australia had opened my eyes to new experiences and a more relaxed attitude towards the human body. I found myself intrigued by the idea of exploring this new level of freedom and breaking away from the societal norms I had grown up with. "That's okay," I found myself saying, surprising even myself with my boldness. "I've never been to a nude beach before, but I'm curious to see what it's like." He smiled at me, a mixture of surprise and admiration in his eyes. "I'm glad you're open to it," he said, squeezing my hand gently. "But if you change your mind or feel uncomfortable at any point, just let me know. I want you to feel safe and respected." His words filled me with a warmth that had nothing to do with the balmy Australian evening. I appreciated his concern for my comfort and boundaries, and it only made me more eager to share this new experience with him. As we said goodnight and parted ways, I couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and nervousness for what the next day would bring. Little did I know that our trip to the nude beach would end up challenging me in ways I never expected, forcing me to confront insecurities I didn't even know I had. But in that moment, all I could think about was the opportunity to spend more time with this amazing guy who had captured my heart, and the thrill of exploring a new level of intimacy and vulnerability with him. As I lay in bed that night, my mind raced with thoughts of the upcoming beach trip and the new territory I was about to explore with my newfound love interest. But amidst the excitement and anticipation, I couldn't help but reflect on my own journey and the path that had led me to this moment. It had only been 2 years since I had come out as bisexual, a revelation that had been both liberating and terrifying. Growing up, I had always felt a sense of otherness, a nagging feeling that I didn't quite fit into the heteronormative mold that society had prescribed. But it wasn't until my early 20s that I finally found the courage to embrace my attraction to both men and women, and coming out had been a gradual process, filled with moments of self-doubt and fear of rejection. But as I slowly opened up to my closest friends and family, I was met with an outpouring of love and support that I never could have imagined. It was as if a weight had been lifted off my shoulders, and I finally felt free to be my authentic self. But even with this newfound sense of self-acceptance, I still had limited experience with men, both romantically and sexually. I had dated a few guys casually, but nothing had ever progressed beyond a few kisses and some heavy petting. And while I had always been comfortable with my own body and sexuality, I had never really given much thought to the size of my sausage or how it compared to others. In fact, I had always believed that size didn't matter, that it was the connection and chemistry between two people that truly counted. I had never felt self-conscious or inadequate in that department, and I certainly never thought that it would become a source of insecurity or anxiety for me. But as I lay there in the darkness, my mind drifted to the upcoming beach trip and the prospect of being naked in front of my new love interest. Suddenly, I found myself wondering if I would measure up, if he would find me attractive and desirable when he saw me in all my vulnerable glory. I tried to push these thoughts aside, reminding myself that he had already shown me nothing but kindness, respect, and attraction. But the seeds of doubt had been planted, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of trepidation as I drifted off to sleep, dreaming of the unknown adventures that lay ahead. Little did I know that the next day would bring a challenge I never could have anticipated, one that would force me to confront my deepest insecurities and question everything I thought I knew about myself and my sexuality. But in that moment, all I could do was trust in the connection we had built and hope that it would be strong enough to weather whatever storms lay ahead. The sun was high in the sky as we arrived at the secluded beach, the warm sand beneath our feet and the sound of the waves crashing against the shore. I could feel my heart racing with a mix of excitement and nervousness as we made our way to a spot near the water's edge, the beach surprisingly empty for such a beautiful day. As we set down our towels and began to unpack our belongings, I couldn't help but steal glances at him, admiring the way the sunlight danced across his tanned skin. But when he began to strip off his clothes, I felt my breath catch in my throat, suddenly unsure of what to do or where to look. I busied myself with setting up our umbrella, trying to appear nonchalant as I watched him out of the corner of my eye. He seemed completely at ease, his movements fluid and graceful as he slipped out of his shorts and stood before me in all his naked glory. But when I finally allowed myself to look at him fully, I felt my jaw drop in shock. There, staring me in the face, was the biggest sausage I had ever seen in my life. It was like something out of a corn movie, long and thick and perfectly proportioned. I couldn't help but stare, my eyes wide and my mouth hanging open in disbelief. For what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few seconds, I was transfixed by the sight of him, my mind reeling with a mix of awe and intimidation. But then he turned to face me, a bottle of sunscreen in his hand, and I quickly averted my gaze, pretending to search for something in my bag. I could feel my face burning with embarrassment as I rummaged through my belongings, my hands shaking slightly as I tried to regain my composure. I had never felt so self-conscious or inadequate in my life, and I suddenly found myself questioning everything I thought I knew about myself and my sexuality. As he began to apply the sunscreen to his body, I couldn't help but sneak glances at him, my eyes drawn to his impressive physique and the way his muscles rippled under his skin. But every time I looked at his sausage, I felt a sense of panic rising in my chest, a fear that I would never be able to measure up or satisfy him in the way he deserved. I was so lost in my own thoughts and insecurities that I barely noticed when he finished applying the sunscreen and turned to me, a questioning look on his face. "Are you going to strip down too?" he asked, his voice gentle and encouraging. But I couldn't bring myself to do it, couldn't bear the thought of exposing myself to him in all my inadequacy. So I just sat there on my towel, fully clothed and feeling like a complete fool, as he looked at me with confusion and concern. I knew I was ruining the moment, knew that I was letting my own insecurities and fears get the best of me. But I couldn't seem to shake the feeling of inadequacy that had taken hold of me. Couldn't seem to find the courage to be vulnerable and open with him in the way that he deserved. The tension between us was palpable as I sat there on my towel, fully clothed and feeling like a deer caught in headlights. I could feel his eyes on me, questioning and concerned, as he waited for me to respond to his invitation to join him in the nude. But I couldn't seem to find the words, couldn't seem to make my body move in the way that I wanted it to. I was paralyzed by my own insecurities, by the fear that I would never be able to measure up to the man standing before me. "Is everything okay?" he asked, his voice soft and gentle as he crouched down beside me. "If you're not comfortable with this, we don't have to stay. We can go somewhere else, do something different." I could hear the kindness in his words, the genuine concern for my well-being. But somehow it only made me feel worse, only heightened the sense of shame and inadequacy that was coursing through my veins. No, it's fine," I mumbled, forcing a smile onto my face. I'm just I'm not used to this, that's all. I think I need a minute to adjust. He nodded, his eyes searching my face for any sign of discomfort or distress. Take all the time you need, he said, standing up and stretching his arms above his head. I'm going to go for a quick swim, but I'll be back in a few minutes. If you change your mind, feel free to join me. I watched as he walked towards the water, his naked form disappearing beneath the waves. And as I sat there on my towel, still fully clothed and feeling like a complete idiot, I couldn't help but wonder what he must be thinking. Did he think I was a prude, a coward, a tease? Did he regret inviting me here, regret getting involved with someone so clearly out of his league? The thoughts swirled around in my head, each one more painful and humiliating than the last. I knew I should have just been honest with him, should have told him about my insecurities and my fears. But something held me back, some deep-seated sense of shame and embarrassment that I couldn't seem to shake. So I just sat there, watching as he swam and lounged in the sun, feeling more and more like an outsider with every passing minute. And when he finally returned to our spot on the beach, his skin glistening with salt water and his hair tousled by the breeze, I could barely bring myself to meet his gaze. "Hey," he said, his voice soft and concerned. "Are you sure you're okay? You seem a little off." I forced a smile, trying to ignore the way my heart was pounding in my chest. "I'm fine," I lied, my voice sounding hollow and unconvincing even to my own ears. "Just a little tired, I guess. Maybe we should head back soon." He hesitated for a moment, his eyes searching my face for any sign of what was really going on. But in the end, he just nodded, his expression a mix of confusion and disappointment. "Okay," he said, reaching for his clothes. "Let's go." And as we packed up our things and made our way back to the car, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had ruined everything, that I had let my own insecurities and fears get in the way of something that could have been truly special. The drive back to my apartment was a blur, my mind replaying the events of the day on an endless loop. I could still see the confusion and disappointment in his eyes, could still feel the weight of my own insecurities and fears pressing down on my chest. As soon as I walked through the door, I stripped off my clothes and headed straight for the bathroom, my heart pounding in my ears. I needed to know, needed to see for myself how I measured up to the man who had captured my heart. With shaking hands, I rummaged through the drawers until I found what I was looking for, a tape measure, its yellow casing worn and faded from years of use. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself as I wrapped the tape around my sausage, my eyes squeezed shut in a futile attempt to block out the truth. But when I finally opened my eyes and looked down at the numbers, I felt my heart sink into my stomach. There, in stark black and white, was the undeniable proof of my own inadequacy. I was below average, smaller than the man who had stood before me in all his naked glory. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks, knocking the wind out of my lungs and sending me stumbling back against the wall. I felt like a failure, like a fraud, like someone who had no business being with a man like him. Tears sprang to my eyes as I sank to the floor, my body shaking with sobs that I couldn't seem to control. I had never felt so small, so insignificant, so utterly unworthy of love and affection. I don't know how long I sat there on the cold tile floor, my tears mingling with the steam from the shower. But eventually I managed to pull myself together, to wipe my eyes and splash some cold water on my face. As I stared at my reflection in the mirror, I barely recognized the person looking back at me. My eyes were red and puffy, my face blotchy and swollen from crying. But beneath the surface, I could see the shame and self-loathing that had taken root in my heart, the deep-seated belief that I would never be good enough, never be worthy of the love and affection that I so desperately craved. I knew I should have reached out to him, should have tried to explain what was going on and why I had acted the way I did. But I couldn't bring myself to do it, couldn't bear the thought of seeing the pity or the disappointment in his eyes. So instead, I crawled into bed and pulled the covers up over my head, wishing that I could just disappear, that I could erase the memory of that day and start over again. But deep down, I knew that there was no going back, that I had let my own insecurities and fears get the best of me, and that I would have to live with the consequences of my actions. As I drifted off to sleep, my mind was filled with images of him, of the way he had looked at me with such tenderness and desire. And even though I knew that I had probably ruined everything, I couldn't help but cling to the hope that somehow, someday, I would find a way to make things right. The next few days passed in a haze of self-doubt and misery, each moment blurring into the next as I tried to come to terms with what had happened at the beach. I couldn't stop thinking about him, couldn't stop replaying the events of that day in my mind, each time feeling the same sense of shame and inadequacy wash over me. But despite my constant thoughts of him, I couldn't bring myself to reach out, couldn't find the courage to pick up the phone and dial his number. Every time I started to compose a text message, my fingers would freeze over the keyboard, my mind going blank as I struggled to find the right words to say. What could I possibly tell him that would make any difference? How could I explain the depths of my insecurities, the fears that had taken hold of me and refused to let go? I felt like a coward, like a fool, like someone who had let his own doubts and anxieties get in the way of something that could have been truly special. As the hours turned into days, I watched as the unread messages from him piled up on my phone, each one a reminder of the connection we had shared and the future we could have had. I knew he was worried about me, knew that he was probably wondering what he had done wrong to make me pull away so suddenly. But still, I couldn't bring myself to respond, couldn't find the strength to face him and admit the truth about what had happened. Instead, I buried myself in work and other distractions, trying to push the thoughts of him out of my mind and focus on anything else. It wasn't easy, though. Every time my phone buzzed with a new message, my heart would skip a beat, my palms growing sweaty as I fought the urge to read what he had written. And every time I saw a couple walking hand in hand on the street, I felt a pang of longing and regret, knowing that I had let my own fears and insecurities get in the way of something that could have been truly beautiful. As the days turned into weeks, I knew that I was only making things worse by avoiding him, knew that I was probably hurting him more by staying silent than I ever could have by being honest. But still, I couldn't seem to break free from the cycle of self-doubt and shame that had taken hold of me, couldn't seem to find the courage to face him and admit the truth. I knew that I was being a coward, knew that I was letting my own fears and insecurities control my life. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't seem to shake the feeling that I was unworthy of his love and affection, that I would never be able to measure up to the man he deserved. And so I continued to avoid him, continued to ignore his messages and pretend that everything was fine, even as the weight of my own self-loathing threatened to crush me from the inside out. I knew that I was only delaying the inevitable, knew that sooner or later I would have to face the consequences of my actions. But for now, all I could do was try to survive, try to make it through each day without falling apart completely. As the weekend drew to a close and the reality of Monday morning loomed on the horizon, I felt a sense of dread settling into the pit of my stomach. I knew that I would have to face him at work, knew that there would be no more hiding behind unanswered texts and missed calls. The thought of seeing him again, of looking into his eyes and seeing the hurt and confusion that I had caused, was almost too much to bear. I had spent the entire weekend trying to come up with a plan, trying to figure out what I would say to him when the inevitable confrontation finally happened. But no matter how many times I rehearsed the words in my head, they never seemed to come out right. I couldn't find a way to explain my behavior, couldn't find a way to make him understand the depths of my own insecurities and fears. As I lay in bed on Sunday night, my mind racing with thoughts of the day ahead, I couldn't help but feel a sense of despair washing over me. I knew that I had messed up, knew that I had let my own doubts and anxieties get in the way of something that could have been truly special. But even as I tried to come to terms with the inevitable end of our relationship, I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to at least try to make things right. I needed to face him, needed to look him in the eye and apologize for the way I had acted. And so, as the alarm clock rang out on Monday morning, I forced myself out of bed and into the shower, trying to wash away the shame and self-doubt that had been clinging to me like a second skin. I dressed carefully, choosing clothes that made me feel confident and put together, even as my insides twisted with nerves. As I walked into the office, I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my palms growing sweaty as I scanned the room for any sign of him. And then, just as I was about to give up hope, I saw him standing by the coffee machine, his back turned to me as he poured himself a cup. For a moment, I hesitated, my feet rooted to the spot as I tried to gather my courage. But then, before I could lose my nerve, I took a deep breath and walked over to him, my voice shaking slightly as I called out his name. He turned to face me, his eyes widening in surprise as he took in my appearance. And in that moment, as I looked into his eyes and saw the hurt and confusion that I had caused, I knew that I had to make things right. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Please, I need to explain what happened." He hesitated for a moment, his gaze searching mine for any sign of insincerity. But then slowly he nodded, his expression softening slightly as he gestured for me to follow him into an empty conference room. As I walked behind him, my heart racing in my chest, I knew that the conversation ahead would be difficult. knew that I would have to face the consequences of my own actions. But even as the fear threatened to overwhelm me, I knew that I had to try, knew that I owed it to him to at least attempt to make things right. As I followed him into the conference room, my mind was racing with 1,000 different thoughts and emotions. I knew that I needed to explain myself, knew that I needed to find a way to make him understand why I had acted the way I did. But even as I tried to gather my thoughts, I could feel the panic rising in my chest, threatening to overwhelm me completely. We sat down across from each other, the tension between us palpable as we both struggled to find the right words to say. I could see the hurt and confusion in his eyes, could feel the weight of my own guilt and shame pressing down on me like a physical force. "I'm sorry," I finally managed to choke out, my voice cracking with emotion. "I know that I've been avoiding you, and I know that I've probably hurt you deeply. But I need you to know that it wasn't because of anything you did. It was all me and my own insecurities and fears." He listened quietly as I poured out my heart, his expression softening slightly as he took in the depth of my pain and regret. And as I spoke, I could feel the weight of my own self-doubt slowly starting to lift, replaced by a sense of relief and gratitude for his understanding. But even as we talked, even as we started to work through the hurt and misunderstandings between us, I knew that I still had a long way to go. I knew that I needed to find a way to deal with my own insecurities, to learn how to love and accept myself for who I was. And so, after our conversation ended and we went our separate ways, I made a decision. I reached out to a therapist, someone who could help me work through the deep-seated issues that had been holding me back for so long. It wasn't easy, admitting to a stranger the depths of my own self-doubt and fear. But as I sat in that office week after week, slowly starting to unpack the baggage that I had been carrying around for so long, I could feel something starting to shift inside of me. I learned how to challenge the negative thoughts that had been controlling my life, learned how to replace them with more positive and empowering beliefs. I learned how to communicate my needs and desires more effectively, how to set boundaries and stand up for myself in healthy ways. And slowly but surely, I started to feel like a different person. I started to see myself through new eyes, started to appreciate the unique qualities and strengths that made me who I was. As I continued to work on myself, I could feel my relationship with him starting to deepen and grow in new and exciting ways. We started to communicate more openly and honestly, started to support and encourage each other in our own journeys of self-discovery and growth. And even though there were still moments of doubt and insecurity, even though there were still times when I struggled to fully love and accept myself, I knew that I was on the right path. I knew that I was finally starting to become the person I had always been meant to be. Looking back on that day at the beach, I realized that it had been a turning point in my life. It had forced me to confront my deepest fears and insecurities, had pushed me to seek out the help and support that I needed to grow and heal. And as I looked to the future, I knew that I was ready for whatever challenges and adventures lay ahead. I knew that with him by my side, and with the tools and skills I had learned in therapy, I could face anything that life threw my way. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly hopeful and excited for what the future might bring.